Hello and welcome. You're watching Newscentre. I'm Parikshit Luthra. After weeks of trade tensions with India, U.S. President Donald Trump has signalled a potential thaw. In a social media post, Trump said that the two countries are continuing negotiations to address the trade barriers, and he's looking forward to speaking with Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Trump wrote, and I quote, "I feel certain that there will be no difficulty in coming to a successful conclusion for both of our great countries," end of quote. Prime Minister Modi echoed the sentiment, calling India and the US close friends and natural partners. The Prime Minister said both teams are working to conclude talks at the earliest. He added, and I quote, "Our trade negotiations will pave the way for unlocking the limitless potential of the India-US partnership," end of quote. Sources say that positive messages indicate trade talks are back on track, and sources also add that officials from India and US are likely to have an exchange of trade delegations soon in a bid to find common ground. Meanwhile, CNBC has reported that Trump has asked the European Union to hit China and India with tariffs of up to 100% over their Russia oil purchases. Trump reportedly indicated that Washington would mirror any such measures taken by the EU. This comes at a time when free trade agreement talks between India and the European Union are nearing completion. Commerce Minister Piyush Goyal has said that about 65% of chapters have been finalized. Goyal added that he is hopeful that an FTA will be concluded substantially by the time the EU Trade and Agricultural Commissioner visits India this week. Joining us now to discuss this further is Meera Shankar, former Indian ambassador to the United States, and Kanwal Sibal, former foreign secretary and also former ambassador to the US. Ambassador Sibal, if I can begin with you, this is a positive indication. Both leaders making this statement that they want to conclude talks at the earliest. Does this mean that some of the thorny points in the relationship have now been taken care of and negotiations could be concluded very soon?
I don't think so. I don't think that the thorny points have been taken care of. The thorniest point is the 25% penalty tariffs that Trump has imposed on India for buying Russian oil and Russian defense equipment. There is no indication that he's willing to lift those tariffs in order to create a more congenial atmosphere to have the next round of talks. Otherwise, it will be under the pressure of these 25% additional tariffs, which means 50% in all. And therefore, India would be expected to make some further concessions to satisfy Trump. Now, remember that as far as we know, the interim deal had been negotiated and satisfactorily negotiated insofar as the negotiators are concerned. And this was put on the table for approval of Trump, but he didn't approve of it because he wants a much bigger deal. In fact, he said that, he was quoted as saying by the USTR, Jamieson Greer, that he wants everything to be opened up or almost everything to be opened up. Now, therefore, he would be looking at some further concessions from us. Now, is it that we can go beyond the concessions that we have already made? I suppose there would be some room to do that, but not enough to be able to pander to Trump's demands and allow him then to say that he has extracted a one-sided deal from India and India has promised all kinds of things.
Right.
These are the kind of statements he has made after the agreement, framework agreement with the EU and the tariff agreement with Japan and South Korea. So the pressure is on us. At the same time, as you've just quoted, Trump saying that he wants Europe to impose 100% tariffs on India and China for buying Russian oil. So he's speaking as usual, in ways in which we can't really pin him down as to what exactly he expects, what he wants. He's very inconsistent and he doesn't mind being inconsistent.
So
he thinks that unpredictability is a tool he has in order to keep the other side under pressure, not knowing how he would react to any given situation. So this gives him a lot of leeway to keep making his demands, and he doesn't mind changing his position.
Absolutely. So let me just get in Ambassador Meera Shankar on that as well. Ambassador Meera Shankar, do you feel now this is a positive development that gives an opening to the sides to come to some sort of breakthrough and common ground?
Well, I would say that it's a positive opening in the sense that the rhetoric has been tamped down And there are more positive sounds coming out of President Trump, and the Trump administration overall has been silent with regard to its very macho statements that it was making vis-a-vis India. So that's the positive. It opens a door. India has also said it's willing to, Prime Minister Modi has said he's willing to re-engage in trade talks with the US. But as Ambassador Sybil said, this is not going to be easy, and India will have to continue to be hard-headed about the negotiations where our vital interests are concerned. Now, the point is that since no deal was agreed upon, whatever we put on the table can be taken away if you're beginning anew, so that you don't get pushed each time to a fresh goalpost. That's what I mean by being a bit hard-headed. Companies, and then there would be a new company set up, and then they would start their cooperation again. Right. But here, it's across the board on all Indian exports, so it's pretty savage. And it's not something which has been sharply focused. Even though I would say that putting sanctions on other countries for buying oil from whichever source they find is the most reasonable is itself, something which exceeds U.S. national law. I mean, It doesn't exceed their national law, but it exceeds the sovereignty of other countries. Absolutely. So I would say that it's going to be not an easy negotiation, but there are positive signals. And from India's side, it would be important that there is some way to address the special tariffs which have been put on.
Okay.
Otherwise,
Ambassador Meera Shankar, I'll return to you. Ambassador Sybil, what do you think has brought Donald Trump and India to this stage now, where they're at least making some positive signals to each other?
I think there has been work done behind the scenes, precisely with the idea of exchanging some positive messaging so that the downward slide in relationship is arrested, and especially the rhetoric from the American side is brought under control, because this is having a much larger effect in terms of the sentiments of the public in India. And also there have been consequences of this in this Hindu hate business that seems to be rising amongst the MAGA crowd, the racist part of the MAGA crowd. So to that extent, this is a good development. As I said, this has been structured deliberately behind the scenes to pan out this way. However, you can't control Trump. And we will see now whether his henchmen pipe down, Besant and Lutnick and Navarro, and they keep quiet, because I'm sure they have been caught off guard also by Trump's sudden tweet, because decisions there are personalized. These are not process-driven decisions. Right. So if that happens, if the rhetoric gets toned down, and until the next round of negotiation takes place, all is quiet on the Western Front, I think that will be a good thing. But the fundamental problem will remain, because Trump is quite unpredictable. He has linked these special tariffs to movement on the Ukraine peace front. And if that runs into trouble, then he'll have even less room to lift the sanctions, special sanctions on India, because then the question would be that why are you making this soft gesture towards Putin when Putin is not ready to negotiate peace in Ukraine? So he's not necessarily, as a foreign minister said, mix the trade issue with the non-trade issue and reduce the margin of maneuver.
Absolutely.
And with 50% tariffs, there's no way that we can have a stable economic relationship. He has to move away from that. And as I said earlier, we can't negotiate with this sort of democracies hanging on our head, that if the US side is not satisfied with the new offers that we may make, then these 50% tariffs would stay. I think there is work ahead, but let's remain a bit optimistic and see where it goes.
You know, Ambassador Meera Shankar, in June, we had already come to some sort of agreement. India had proposed a trade framework to the US whereby the tariffs were lower than 15%, at least. How do you think the negotiations will begin now? How will India approach fresh negotiations after recent rounds of trade tensions and very sharp rhetoric?
I'm sure that there will be efforts through back channels to try to lay out the contours of the negotiations and the contacts. But it's clear that both sides want to pick up the threads. And since there was speculation that part of the reason that President Trump was sending back the trade deals with India, even though, negotiators felt it had virtually been concluded, was his personal peeve over some of the statements which had been made during the India-Pakistan conflict, that he had brought it to an end, which India had contradicted. Maybe by now, if cooler, saner advice is prevailing, then perhaps, what we would like to see is a more reasonable US position with regard to India's red lines. I think it's important that the US understands it. Now they've understood that we really can't be browbeaten into complying with what they would like. At the end of the day, a trade agreement has to be acceptable to both sides, particularly for a large developing country like India, which has constituencies, politically important, economically sensitive and vulnerable constituencies, such as farmers, who could be very adversely impacted. And that could cause its own set of social and political turmoil in India. So it's not something which, any government is going to accept lightly.
Right.
So at some level, I think it would be important for the US to recognize this and to adopt a more reasonable posture in the negotiations.
Okay, Ambassador Sibbal, considering that the statements made by Donald Trump and Prime Minister Modi are quite similar, the tone is very similar, and then you had Donald Trump also retweeting or posting the Prime Minister's tweet on his Truth Social handle. Does this go to show that both sides and leaders, officials of both sides had clearly coordinated this exercise to show that India and United States remain united despite the kind of narratives that may have emerged from the SCO summit?
Well, you can't really pin down exactly what Trump's thinking is and what his next move would be, logically speaking. Now, as I said before, it's a good thing that both sides have felt that we must try and tone down the rhetoric that was developing and the negative atmosphere that was being created. And I think there are two things that have persuaded Trump to have a renewed look at his strategy towards India. One is that unlike the others, India stood firm. And certainly this has gone to the advantage of India and Modi and his leadership. We have not reacted with the polemics and rhetoric, but we have stood our position. And the second is the very nervous reaction in US think tanks and media and political circles of the photograph of three leaders, Xi Jinping, Putin, and Modi, hobnobbing, in Tianjin, and questions being asked in the United States about losing India, and that this has been one of the most serious blows to US foreign policy that Trump has inflicted. So maybe there is some rethinking that it is not wise to push more India into the wrong direction and alienate it, because it might affect the larger geopolitical interests of the United States. Now, this is rational thinking. Now, whether Trump is capable of internalizing this rational thinking and control his impulses, I don't know, because he's very, very unpredictable, and he has treated his allies so shoddily allies who have served U.S. interests far more than India has. But he has not had no compunction in doing so.
All
So
right.
for us to assume that he'll have some special corner from India might be a mistake.
We have to be realistic about that.
But
But
as
we'll
I
have to
said,
leave it there.
Yeah.
We'll
As
have
I
to
said,
leave it there, Ambassador. But thank you so much for joining us. I'm completely running out of time, but it's been a great discussion with you and Ambassador Meera Shankar as always. We are going to take a short break, but don't go anywhere. Our discussion on India-US ties and this positive momentum continues. We will be joined by Mukesh Aghi, President, US-India Strategic Partnership Forum, on the other side.